There is no rescue scene in Alan Gardiner's Patagonia mission. The ship did not come while anyone was alive to receive it. Put the map on screen. Britain is here. The Falkland Islands are here. Picton Island and Spaniard Harbour sit far to the south in the channels of Tierra del Fuego. Montevideo is not next door. It is another link in the chain. Every letter has to cross water, wait in a port, find a captain, and become action before 7 men on a shore can eat. That is the case. 7 men landed near Picton Island in December 1850 with 2 launches, 6 months of provisions, and a supply plan that looked workable from London. By September 1851, Gardiner's last dated journal entry was being written beside a damaged boat in Spaniard Harbour. The visible cause was hunger. The useful cause was logistics, a supply arrangement too weak for the distance between Britain, the Falklands, Montevideo, and Tierra del Fuego. One sentence will keep returning because it is the whole case in miniature. The supply ship has not arrived. The Patagonian Missionary Society was young, small, and underfunded. Its purpose was to send Protestant missionaries to the indigenous peoples of southern South America. Gardiner was not a lone religious figure moving toward a dramatic death. He was acting inside an organization that had to raise money, hire passage, buy boats, ship stores, and rely on distant ports to turn letters from Britain into action. That distinction changes the frame. A biography can turn Gardiner into a martyr, a saint, or a fool. A case reconstruction asks what the mission was designed to survive. The first proof is the boat they did not buy. Gardiner had wanted a proper mission vessel, a brigantine or schooner that could hold provisions, move away from danger, and maintain communication with the Falklands. The Society could not afford that plan. The cheaper plan was 2 launches, each about 26 feet long, with provisions for 6 months and another supply to follow. On paper, this reduced the cost. On the coast, it removed the margin. The party sailed from Liverpool on the Ocean Queen on the 7th of September 1850. The names matter because the mission's design depended on their functions. Gardiner was the organizer and naval officer. Richard Williams was surgeon and catechist. When sickness came, his record would give the bluntest diagnosis of the plan. John Maidment was catechist and one of the men still close to Gardiner near the end. Joseph Irwin was the ship carpenter, the practical man you want when a boat becomes a problem. John Pierce, John Badcock, and John Bryant were Cornish fishermen, chosen because the little vessels would need working seamen, not only preachers. 7 men, 2 launches, 1 supply chain. They reached Picton Island on 5 December. The boats were named Pioneer and Speedwell. The first letters home were reassuring. The party was united, the boats were approved, and the men were enduring the discomforts. The first letter made distance look smaller than it was. The fatal assumption was that a London supply plan could survive an 8-week one-way mail cycle to Tierra del Fuego. The assumption had parts. A second 6 months of provisions had to leave Britain, reach the Falklands, and be forwarded to the mission site. Gardiner wrote to Samuel Lafone of Montevideo, whose Falkland interests gave him a possible southern route. A letter was also sent to Captain B.J. Sullivan at East Falkland. It reached too late. Sullivan had already left. Put that on the map as the first failure. A letter moves. A man has gone. The plan still exists in Britain, but one of its human links is gone. The supply stores were prepared, but the Society could not find a vessel willing to carry them straight to Picton Island. The fallback depended on the East Falkland connection and on reports that a government vessel went monthly for wood to Tierra del Fuego. The stores were put aboard the brig Pearl, advertised for April. This is the second proof. The supply did not have its own ship. It had requests, hopes, and a route on paper. It did not have control. The men on the coast did not know that difference until the difference began to eat into the calendar. Their first problem was not famine, it was position. The Ocean Queen left them on 19th December. Gardiner planned to search for Jemmy Button, the Yagan man taken to Britain during Fitzroy's Beagle years, and returned to Tierra del Fuego. He hoped an English-speaking local contact could make the mission possible. That hope is one of the colonial pressures in this case. Gardiner had come to evangelize the Yagan people. This was not empty country waiting for a mission. It was Yagan country, known through canoe routes, fishing places, shellfish grounds, seasonal movement, and language. The surviving record is mostly European. It tells us what Gardiner saw and feared. It rarely tells us what Yagan families understood when two foreign boats arrived with stores, guns, tents, and plans for conversion. When those sources call the Yagan hostile, that is not a diagnosis of a people. The archive records European fear more clearly than Yagan intention. Later records from Thomas Bridges and modern work on Yagan language and archaeology make one thing clear. The Yagan were marine specialists in a hard archipelago. Their knowledge of coves, channels, shellfish, birds, and weather was the knowledge Gardiner did not possess. The mission moved because staying still was difficult. The party searched for safer harbor, lost smaller boats, struggled with leaks, and tried to repair the Pioneer. By January, Spaniard Harbour had become shelter. Ernest Cove, Cook's River, Pioneer Cavern. Then the boat became a building. Hold on that image. The Pioneer had been bought as transport. On the 1st February, a gale blew into the harbor and drove her onto a rock. Her bows were broken. One section was hauled higher on the beach. Canvas was stretched over it. A launch that was supposed to move through channels became a sleeping place on shore. That is the third proof. The mission did not only lose a boat, it lost the idea that the boats could rescue the plane. In a stronger operation, a damaged launch would be a repair problem. In this operation, it was structural collapse. The carpenter could patch, the fisherman could work oars and lines, Williams could treat sickness, Maidment could keep daily labor going. None of them could turn two launches into the schooner Gardiner had first wanted. Williams wrote the blunt conclusion preserved in the later account. Nothing short of a brigantine or schooner of 80 or 100 tons could answer their needs. The men discovered in February what the budget had refused in England. By then, retreat was becoming less practical. The speedwell still existed, but the party was sickening, the weather was violent, and the boats were no longer reliable escape tools. Later sources asked why they did not sail for the Falklands, Port Famine, or the Patagonian coast. From a warm room, that line looked simple. On the shore, it had to be sailed by weakening men in damaged open craft. The decision that changed everything was the decision to wait at Spaniard Harbour for the relieving vessel. It was not dramatic. It was the narrowing of all other choices. They could not establish the mission at Banner Cove, reach Jemmy Button, or count on the boats as a floating base. They could mark rocks, bury bottles, and wait where a search vessel could find them. On 22nd of March, they buried notices in bottles at Banner Cove. On screen, this should be the document close up. The notice said they had gone to Spaniard Harbour. It said sickness was on board. It said supplies were nearly out. Then it gave the line that should have ended the experiment. If not soon relieved, we shall be starved. That is not a grand last word. It is a logistics memo. The notice did not ask London to admire their endurance. It asked a vessel to arrive before the margin closed. On 29 of March, they returned to Ernest Cove. From here, the episode becomes a waiting calendar. April is not yet a death scene. It is a table of losses. Powder is scarce. A fishing net has been lost. Fresh meat is hard to obtain. A goat's skin suggests animals seen earlier are gone. Scurvy appears. Fish can sometimes be bought. Mussels and limpets can be gathered. Garden seeds can be boiled into broth. Seaweed can be boiled down to jelly. This is what supply failure looks like before it becomes a body count. Not one empty chest, but a sequence of absences. No powder enough for steady hunting, no net, no reliable trade, no vessel, no correction from Britain, because Britain is still hearing the wrong part of the story at the wrong speed. The popular missionary version turns these months into holy endurance. The contemporary record does show endurance, but it also shows something more concrete. 7 people trapped inside a delivery failure. By late June, John Badcock was dead. Smiley's later extract placed his death on 28 June, after starvation and scurvy had consumed the camp. Joseph Irwin and John Bryan also died before the end. Richard Williams and John Pierce were later found near Cook's River or the head of the harbor. John Maidment died shortly before Gardiner. The death list is not a devotional sequence. It is a shrinking crew list. The doctor is gone. The carpenter is gone. The fishermen are gone. The catechist is gone. By September, the organizer is writing alone. The arithmetic did not need malice, it needed delay. This is what we know. The party reached Picton Island in December 1850. They had 2 launches and limited provisions. The Pioneer was damaged in February. They left notices at Banner Cove on 26th of March stating their location and danger. Their supplies ran down through the southern winter. Gardiner's last dated journal entry is 5th of September 1851. A note dated 6th of September survives in later transcription. Captain William Horton Smiley and the John Davison reached Banner Cove on 21st October, followed the notices to Spaniard Harbour, and found bodies. HMS Dido under Captain Morshead returned in January 1852, buried remains, and recovered papers. This is what we do not know. We do not know the Yagan account of the early encounters in Gardiner's own season. We do not know every calculation inside the boats after June. We do not know the exact moment of Gardiner's death. The common date is 6th of September, inferred from the last note and the state of the record. We do not know whether a better funded society would have succeeded in its aim. Those gaps matter. They are where legend enters. When the record cannot give the Yagan side every decision after June, or the exact last breath, the easy story fills the room. Faithful men, hostile land, noble death. But the surviving papers point in a harder direction. This is not a story about men who simply starved. It is the story of an expedition that could write letters faster than its system could react. I read the recovered notices less as last words than as paperwork, addressed to a system that had already missed its useful window. The last confirmed point is not a trail on a map. It is a document point. 5th of September 1851, Spaniard Harbour. Gardiner's journal records that he had been preserved for 4 days without bodily food and without the feeling of hunger or thirst. The next day's note, addressed to Williams, though Williams was already gone, says another of the company had been called home. The handwriting, the pencil, the wet papers, the boat in the cave became the mission's last archive. After this point, no living witness speaks from the camp. The next voices are rescuers, but the first vessel was not the planned supply answer. It was the American schooner John Davison, sent from Montevideo by Samuel Lafone after anxiety had grown too great to ignore. Lafone had reportedly ordered vessels to touch at Picton Island before. The later account says those directions were not carried out. On 21st October, the John Davison anchored in Banner Cove. The rock directions were still legible enough. Gone to Spaniard Harbour. The bottles were dug up. On 22nd October, Smiley reached Spaniard Harbour in bad weather and found the first bodies and papers. The scene is often remembered as discovery. In practical terms, it was an audit. Books on the beach, medicines, clothing, tools, a boat on shore, a body inside, a grave, a gale rising too hard for the search to continue. Smiley could bury one body and leave. The rest of the work fell to HMS Dido in January 1852. Morshead's report describes the boat near Cape Kinnaird, the note urging haste, the bodies of Gardiner and Maidment, and the wrecked boat where Williams and Pierce were identified from the papers. Morshead admired Gardiner's conduct. He also wrote the sentence the system could not absorb without embarrassment. They had perished for want of timely supplies. That line is the hinge between record and legend. The legend says the missionaries starved because Tierra del Fuego tested Christian devotion. The records say something less useful for hagiography. The men waited at a known place after leaving written directions, and relief failed to arrive in time. The Victorian Christian press did not invent the deaths. It shaped their meaning. It took a supply failure and raised it into an edifying death. Gardiner's patience was real. His faith was real. But a real virtue can still hide in institutional failure. That is why the martyr framing is sticky. It gives every actor a clean role. Gardiner becomes saintly. The society becomes persevering. The dead become seed for a later mission. The Yagan become obstacles to conversion. The supply contract has no clean role in that version. The society had enough money to send men in boats. It did not have enough money to own the vessel that would keep them supplied. It could ask, rely on reports, place stores aboard a ship for the Falklands, and write to Lafone and Sullivan. It could not make the next captain, agent, weather window, and port schedule obey 7 men in Spaniard Harbour. The Yagan source gap changes the ethical shape too. Gardiner hoped to build a mission for people whose routes and knowledge the European record barely lets speak. Later mission records, Bridges' dictionary, and modern archaeology show a maritime society with deep environmental knowledge. The tragedy is not that Europeans failed to master empty country. It is that they entered an inhabited coast with a plan that depended more on British correspondence than on local relationship. The result was a mission that could write but could not hear. It could send letters out. It could leave bottles under rocks. It could not make those bottles arrive before the bodies became evidence. After the deaths, the Patagonian Missionary Society did not close. Gardiner's story became a fundraising engine. Despard's line, "The mission shall be maintained," became the new institutional answer. In 1854, a schooner named Alan Gardiner was launched. The later plan used what Gardiner had come to believe in his last season: a Falkland base, a mission vessel, language work, and movement by sea rather than a fixed shore party with weak supply. Put the 1854 schooner beside the two launches. That image is the verdict before the narrator gives one. The vessel was not a rescue. It was an institutional admission, built in wood. The common objection is that Gardiner chose risk. That is partly true. He pressed the cheaper plan. He believed the launches were enough. The fatal assumption was not forced on him by a faceless committee. He helped carry it. But conviction did not strengthen the contract. Gardiner's papers are full of faith. They are also full of practical notices. Where they were, where bottles were buried, which harbor to search, how near the supplies were to exhaustion, what vessel was expected. The archive does not place him above logistics. It shows him writing logistics until he could no longer write. That is the record the martyr version tends to flatten. A martyr story asks whether the death was meaningful. A case reconstruction asks whether the death was necessary. No single person signed a document saying 7 men would be abandoned. The failure was distributed. Underfunded society, remote route, slow ports, slow mail, absent ships, closing weather, illness, and encounters across culture that the European record barely understood. But distributed failure is still failure. My verdict is this: Alan Gardiner's Patagonia mission did not fail because Tierra del Fuego was empty, savage, or unreachable. It failed because a London society sent a shore mission while purchasing hope for a supply system, not the system itself. The final proof is the vessel launched afterward. The supply ship did arrive, not as rescue, as correction.